All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. I'm so excited to have you here for another episode as we start Q2. I can't believe we're already well into spring and continuing to roll. If you hit your number in Q1, congratulations, you're back to zero. If you didn't hit your number, don't worry about it. You're back to zero. You're equal to everybody else. So we're all working the same place now. Hey, if you're watching and listening live today to Sales Pipeline Radio, you can be part of the show. If you've got a comment, a question, a rebuttal, our discussion today, we'd love to hear from you. Put that into the comments. We can refer to that. We can bring it up on the screen and have a little. If you are listening, watching on demand, thank you so much for subscribing. Every episode, Sales Pipeline Radio always available, past, present, future, at salespipelinadio.com. Today, very excited to have from outside somewhere in the early spring, we've got Jim Jockle. He is the Executive Vice President, CMO at Numerics. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Oh, Matt, thank you. And I'm embracing the spring, although it's a little bit cold.
Yeah, no, same here in Seattle. It's a little chilly. We had a high school track meet yesterday. Started the day in shirt sleeves, and as the sun went over the hill, it got chilly very quickly. But well, thanks for doing this. Was excited to have you on and really talk about sort of this concept of data-driven marketing, which means a lot of things to a lot of people. And just curious, when you think of data-driven marketing as a CMO, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because it does mean a lot of things. And, I'd say, number one, the most important thing about being data-driven is, it's all about optimization and, serving up the right things at the right time, obviously trying to get the most important impact. But, if I think about it from my shoes, right, and I always say this to other marketers is, number one, what is your company's objectives, right? What are the KPIs? What are the core levers you're trying to maneuver as an organization? And then how does that flow down through our own OKR strategy, right? So that way, every marketer has an understanding of the impact of individual KPIs and then how that rolls up and how we're moving company levers. But at the same time, I think there's a lot to be said in numbers. There's a lot of sometimes false information as well. But, for the most part, that's kind of the way I look at it, Matt.
So I love that approach. I want to just break that down a little bit. I think there's, everybody in any role needs to have a target. Right? You need to have an objective or not targets have precise measures, right? And the more complex the outcome, the harder sometimes it can be to measure. How do you juxtapose those things together? How do you sort of match a defined target with sometimes an imperfect way of measuring the complexity of how to.
Yeah, and even within that, right? Past success isn't a predictor of future success, right? So, I think the key thing is really, when I think about what I did as a team almost probably about 6 years ago is we started weekly analytics meetings, right? And we sat down and said, okay, every Friday we're going to just look and see how our campaigns are going, how they're tracking, what's the measurement of success, and then really what are the optimizations we could do. And then, to the extent that we started thinking that way, right, then we knew what to either double down on or quickly abandon. And, obviously, I think for all of us, the success is revenue. How are we optimizing? How are we driving revenue? That's what my CFO cares about. That's what my CEO cares about, right? So, it's the optimization process that I don't think a lot of people really think about. It's, let's set the metrics, let's set goals, but if you're not pausing in a regular cadence to really figure out, well, gee, what can I do to better this performance? Well, then, that's where you're missing the mark.
So how often are you bettering? So I completely agree with you. How often are you focused on improvement of performance and results? And how often do you look at whether we have the right metrics to measure performance? Are there different KPIs for those different efforts?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost is having the right, let's call it Marcom tech stack in place where you're getting those metrics. Second is, how are you bringing it together, right? The key with these platforms is none of them integrate well, right? So having someone, I've become a Power BI evangelist in my entire organization, trying to understand how I'm pulling stuff out of different APIs in different ways, and trying to make processes as automated as possible, which is absolutely impossible, especially with certain closed systems. Now, we're a B2B company. We're in financial services, fintech. So, we're reliant on social platforms like LinkedIn. We're not doing Facebook, and you're kind of locked in that ecosystem. And how do you hook that up in Marketo or within your Google Analytics? How do you bring that together? That in and of itself is the biggest challenge, to say, okay, what metrics do I need to understand success? The second element of that is, I tend to like to think in a 16-week cadence cycle on campaigns, even though I have longer campaigns, but I like to think of them as subset campaigns, and then have optimization meetings at the end of those 16 weeks. And then that kicks off the planning for another particular sprint. So, number one, what do I want to measure? How do I want to measure it? Can I get the analytics? Do I have the right platform to look at it? And then what is my cadence of optimization? To me, has been a critical backbone to the things we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. We're talking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Jim Jockle. He's the EVP and Chief Marketing Officer for Numerics, where he's been employed for over 16 years. Jim, that doesn't happen.
Well, considering I got out of college 12 years ago, no one's believing that. Got it. Okay, yeah. No, Numerics has been an amazing ride, Matt, and continues to be. We were acquired about, I want to say 18 months ago. Since then, we've done 2 acquisitions, and as part of the Gensar family, acquisitions are our thesis. So it's an amazing time of change in terms of bringing new organizations, learning new best practices from new colleagues, but at the same time, entering new markets. So the challenge is big, bold, and exciting.
So anytime you've been in a company that long, you see a lot of change, right? And the idea of data-driven marketing, the idea of accountability is much older than Numerics, but the technology and tools and access to data we have has certainly changed significantly. Can you talk about the cultural change internally that has been required to just continue to fine-tune accountability and precision of data-driven marketing over your tenure at Heinz?
Yeah, fundamentally, I believe if you're not reinventing yourselves every 3 years, then you're doing yourself a disservice, right? That's the pace of marketing. The technology changes, the way people interact with brands change, right? So I've always challenged myself, the team, to try and be as forward-thinking as possible. The nice thing about working at a company like Numerics, I mean, at this point, we're like 550 people, but, we're smaller. And that has allowed us to fail fast, to be nimble, try new things. And luckily, I've been blessed with a CEO along the way that has allowed me to do that, right? Without, hours and hours of compliance, red tapes, and departments that own different things. I've been able to think about things holistically, which is actually probably the key reason I've been able to last so long. But the technology, if you don't keep pace with it and you don't embrace it, you're gonna be left out in the cold. And obviously, I think that comes into the revolution right now of AI. I'm sure, just as I do, I'm sure you get 10,000 emails a day on how AI is changing marketing. Well, you know what? Roll up the sleeves and learn how to be a prompt engineer, or you're not going to be in marketing for long.
That's true. Well, I think that's true for a lot of technology advances, whether it's getting better at the digital channels, getting better at using the data to make better decisions moving forward. I always think of attribution less about the past, more about the future. I think too often we look at attribution as a political exercise inside organizations to determine who gets credit for what has already happened. And what has already happened to me is a sunk cost. I already spent the money and time. Whatever happened. Whatever results come of it is whatever. What I want to manage is the future. I want to know how to create more predictable, reliable outcomes in the future. To me, that's what attribution is about. Talk a little bit about your perspective on attribution and how you, with your sales colleagues and others, are leveraging data to think about and predict better futures.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably one of the more challenging questions that's out there. And the first thing I think I've said to a lot of marketers is understand your sales cycle, right? Where, especially in B2B is where do I begin, and then where's the sales cycle to begin, right? So effectively, if I think of the sales cycles in my organization, I would argue I'm probably 6 months ahead. 6 to 8 months ahead, right? By the time they get through me, they're nurtured, right? They're sales qualified, they're passed along. Then you're starting an additional, let's call it 6 month sales cycle on top of it. So while my organization's in 2Q, I'm in Q4 right now, right? And then how do I think about it in terms of predictability? I think, part of the alignment that we're talking about now is how do we bring SDRs as part of the marketing organization, right? How do we begin how do we own, let's call it, lead gen up until say 25% qualification and pass that over the line. I think, I think that to me is a really exciting mentality, right? Because I think every marketer I talk to is, we pass leads over to sales. They don't want to follow up. What are my conversion rates? I worry about all of that stuff. But to the extent, more CMOs and marketing departments can take ownership of that early stage pipeline and really then handing over things that are truly qualified really starts breaking down those silos and walls between the sales organization and the marketing organization, because sales will know there's something real here as compared to, us, sitting back and begging and pleading and saying, please call, this one's MQL, we got the scoring right. So I think that's a newer trend I'm starting to see, and it's something that I'm excited to embrace.
Love that. We'll wrap it up here on Sales Pipeline Radio with Jim Jockle. Last question for you is just the increased complexity of B2B buying and selling. As you have more members of the buying committee involved, you have in many cases longer sales cycles, more people on the selling side involved. Sales, marketing, and sales working together really becomes a body of work and a team sport for buying and selling. What does that mean for the future of data-driven marketing? It seems like it's going to get even more complicated for us to be able to measure what's working, but more important to know what's working in that complex weave of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it's funny, the whole world now is let's go account-based marketing, everything. Yay, let's buy this module, get upsold by Adobe, whatever. That said, I think that the critical thing is don't lose sight on the fundamentals. Don't lose sight on personas. Don't lose sight on a funnel of content in terms of content marketing, in terms of thought leadership, all the way down to decisioning-based content, right? Don't lose the sight of that we're actually still selling to people.
Correct.
Right? Because a lot of people stop thinking in that way on whatever the latest trend may be, right? Because that's ultimately who we're trying to connect with.
Oh man, I'm really glad you brought that up. I actually love the shift towards thinking about the account as the sellable target, but buildings don't write checks. And until robots sell to robots, Jim, which may be down the line, who knows? But until that actually happens, there's still human emotional connections we need to make. And I think we don't always make decisions rationally. So to lean into the human element of selling and buying, really important. Well, Jim, I know you're busy. I appreciate you joining. It looks like it's getting a little more overcast out there. I hope you don't have a storm coming. It's the clouds. Literally in the last 5 minutes, we went from blue sky to overcast if you're watching here. So stay safe, stay dry. Thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. We'll be here next week again at 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern. My name is Matt Heinz. We'll see you next week. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.